It's that time of year again. It's time to look back on the games released in 2022, but unlike past years, this time I'll be reflecting on 5 of my favorite games of the year and 5 games that weren't so good. I had a really difficult time coming up with this list. A number of games I was interested in were delayed to 2023, and many I thought would be my top games left me feeling pretty neutral or underwhelmed, but here we are. You may agree or you may disagree with my choices, so let me know your top 5 games and your worst 5 games in the comments below. Let's get started.
And a beautiful blonde man will sit next to us and smile at you. Yeah, okay. He'll say, "I like your eyes." And I'll say, "Back off. She's with me." You're full of shit. I love this time of night.
The original Life is Strange is one of those games practically everyone has played or knows about. So many players have had an emotional connection to the characters and the world they inhabited, so much so that any follow-up to the original has either been underwhelming or sadly overlooked. Clearly, there is much love for the original to garner a prequel, plenty of merchandise, and a comic series that continues from one of the game's endings, so remastering Life is Strange and Before the Storm could have been a wise business move if it worked. This remaster collection is diminishing to the legacy of the franchise. It's a simple cash grab that barely enhances the original releases, and it's so odd to release a remaster collection on the same platforms you can find these original releases on, plus it was released after True Colors, the latest Life is Strange title you can find on next-gen consoles that looks completely breathtaking. If this collection was released exclusively for next-gen consoles, that would have been more understanding. The remastered collection was released with so many bugs and glitches that the game had to have so many patches for it to be at least reasonable, and there are still problems. The colors in both games are darkened, and outside of some questionable lighting and hair movements, nothing really new is added. Before the Storm probably looks the best, but only because it was released later. Unless you're a super fan of Life is Strange, these re-releases shouldn't warrant another playthrough. If you're a Switch player and the Arcade Bay collection is the only way for you to play the games, which is the remastered collection but renamed, don't waste your money by purchasing Life is Strange Remastered Collection and just buy the original releases. You deserve the best versions of both games, and this is not it. It's been a long time since I've had this much fun with a Pac-Man game, and it's great to see Pac-Man back in 3D once again, even if it's a remake. Pac-Man World Re-Pac is a great remake. It doesn't try to be something it's not, but improves upon everything from the original with some minor changes, and brings you back to a time where there were many high-quality mascot platformers that were quite surprising. Just like the original game, Pac-Man's on a quest to save his family, but his family is a bit different than you may have remembered it on the PS1 due to legal reasons. But despite these changes, the game doesn't take shortcuts or cheapens the experience. It's a solid platformer that can be challenging in certain levels without growing stale or frustrating. After Pac-Man's last 3D outing with the Ghostly Adventures, it's nice to see a more traditional Pac-Man experience return. The swapping of an iconic character like Miss Pac-Man to Pac-Mom is still very sour, which you can find more about with this video, but it's nice to see Pac-Man get his time to shine once again and show that the old fella still has some life to him. Let's hope this remake is the start of Pac-Man's return to 3D gaming with more remakes, or better yet, a 4th Pac-Man world.
We bring you a hand-picked selection of only the finest that Hackett's Quarry has to offer.
No freaking way.
Yes, frickin' way. Pop, pop, peanut butter, butter pops. Pop, pop, pop 'em in your mouth. Pop!
The Quarry is a bad game. It wants so badly to be Until Dawn, but gets crushed by the massive impact the game had. Its structure is vaguely too similar to Until Dawn's, and it's a shame. The game has some perfect twists and turns, but it all comes a little too late. Spanning over 10 chapters, the game doesn't really start to get exciting until late in Chapter 6 to early Chapter 7. The premise of a horror story at summer camp is a proven formula, and the twist this game has is decent, but again, it's all too similar to Until Dawn. The characters are extremely unlikable and cliche, and the only character I really like was played by Brenda Song, who manages to do her poorly written dialogue some justice, but the banter between all the characters comes across as forced, and often feels like the actors are fumbling under this poor excuse of a script. The graphics feel like a downgrade rather than an upgrade, and I'm playing on a PlayStation 5. I know Unreal Engine 4 has its flaws, but it's evident in almost every single supermassive game, and ultimately, the game lacks polish for being a full-price title. This is most evident in the sometimes wonky character animations, such as these two characters swimming. And for an interactive experience, it didn't really feel as interactive as Until Dawn or the Dark Pictures anthology. Even on an easier difficulty, rather than having button presses, all actions are done with the analog stick, which cheapens the experience. And when the game ends, its epilogue is a 20+ minute podcast as the credits roll, and it ends up being so boring and obnoxious I could barely wait around to hear it. An ending can make or break a game, and ultimately it feels rushed and then just stops. The Quarry is a massive disappointment. Skip over it and play Until Dawn again, or better yet, play the next game on this list.
Shit! Game on, bitch.
Since Man of Medan, the Dark Pictures anthology has been a mixed experiment. Between glitches and sometimes poor storytelling, it's a roller coaster of a ride of what you're going to get every year. I found myself enjoying Man of Medan and Little Hope, but 2021's House of Ashes was horrible. The story was boring, the setting was bland, and Ashley Tisdale could not play a wide range of roles as she does in this. And it wasn't until late in the third act that everything started to improve, but barely. I almost didn't play The Devil in Me because of both how horrible House of Ashes and The Quarry were, but I'm glad I did. The Devil in Me is hands down the best in the anthology so far. It uses its setting, characters, and ultimate creep of a killer to its advantage. Taking place in a replica of a murder house on an island, a film crew is brought in to document the history behind it, and it isn't long until mysterious happenings lead to questions and ultimately a game of cat and mouse in an ever-changing house. While the characters could use some tweaking, it actually feels like the characters are more natural rather than stereotypical. Gameplay has also had its most drastic change in the series, with the ability for characters to jump, push and pull objects, hide, and the use of an inventory, with each character having their own unique item. Even the jump scares were genuinely scary and didn't come across as cheap. After I was done playing, I felt paranoid about the killer being in my actual house. That's how good and scary the game is. Supermassive games have saved the best for last in this Season 1 finale, and hopefully The Devil in Me is a good sign of things to come when the next game in the series, Directive 8020, comes out.
Over here!
When it comes to 3D Sonic games, as anyone knows, he hasn't had much luck. Sega has never perfected Sonic's transition from 2D to 3D, nor has ever really settled on the type of world they want Sonic to be in. There has always been something that has flawed each entry in some way, even if the quality is better than the rest. Sonic Frontiers is once again another entry to follow the pattern. Frontiers isn't a bad game, but it is a game that doesn't feel like it knows what it wants. Taking Sonic into an open world format is probably one of the wisest moves Sega has done. I just wish the game didn't feel like a copy and paste of what we have seen in other games. With this freedom comes an open world that doesn't feel quite complete nor has its own identity. Sonic can grind on various obstacles, bounce off of, and climb on, but their placement feels like an afterthought and greatly stands out. It's like the developers used an open world template and just stuck some platforms in the air. The two don't properly blend together. And I know Sonic has never been heavy on its storytelling, but I'm expecting so much more. The game opens with the events of how Dr. Eggman messed things up, opened up a new world, and that's how Sonic and his few friends are sucked into this new world, but it's all rushed into this pretty fast. There's no build up, Sonic and his friends just look to be in the wrong place at the wrong time as they always are. Sega is on the right path here with Sonic Frontiers, but the game needs much more improvement, and clearly the game wasn't ready in the state it was released in, despite being delayed over a year. Sonic is on a high right now thanks to 2 successful major films, and he just needs a successful, talked about game to match. For being Sega's flagship franchise and iconic mascot, the franchise deserves much more love.
The windshield has been destroyed. I'm going to eject.
Ever since I saw Bright Memory Infinite in the Xbox Series X and S showcase in 2020, I wanted to play this game. And 2 years later, it's finally available for the PlayStation 5, and it did not disappoint. The game isn't perfect, the story is its ultimate downfall, and it's very light on the storytelling. But once the game begins, it's an immediate adrenaline rush into the action. And the game likes to spice things up. When you're not in fast-paced gunplay and wall running, you have swordplay and supernatural abilities, on top of stealth sections that do the job they're meant to do, but that's about it. They aren't too exciting, but luckily they aren't long. Eventually more guns and a grapple are added in for more variety. My favorite section has to be when the agency the protagonist works for delivers her a car during a massive storm. You have to fight your way to the car and then drive it through the storm as enemies attack. It doesn't last long, but there's so much excitement when doing this. These unique, special sections keep Bright Memory Infinite fresh and help chop up the standard gameplay. The environments are simply beautiful. The game is made with the Unreal Engine 4 and it does wonders for the environment. The gloomy, wet, and rainy environments make its ancient Asian architecture stand out even more. There is so much character in the environment itself. The game's ending may be a letdown, but it's the gameplay in this game that shines the most. I could do without the pointless bonus bikinis for a first-person shooter, but it's a non-stop action movie experience that I never want to end, and for its price, it's a better game than it probably should be.
The fuck are you doing, Nina?
Esto es por ti, mamá.
The original Saints Row was one of the rare Grand Theft Auto clones to carve a name for itself and build a popular franchise. And as the series progressed into ridiculousness, the series started to divide players, eventually failing with the spin-off Agents of Mayhem. But developer Volition has returned with a reboot of the entire series. The new Saints Row feels like a blend of Saints Row 2 and 3. It's a game that speaks to a modern crowd than one of yesteryear, but it's also a game that hasn't evolved with the times. Like any of the older games, you'll be starting from scratch and building your empire through various missions and side quests. If you played any of the Saints Row games, it feels more of the same, with some minor new additions and a decent created character. While the open world is nice and varied compared to what we've seen before, it also feels empty despite cars and people walking around. The game also plays it safe rather than being risque and taking risks as previous entries did. There is humor, but it often comes across as stiff and sometimes forced. The further I played, the more I enjoyed the group of friends my character was forced to hang out with. Each of these characters has their own story and ambitions, something they all want to work on together to achieve. That was probably one of the major highlights in the game and something I could relate to. But by the end of the game, I just didn't care anymore. The main enemies are rather pathetic, and it just ends up being a slog of extra missions to drive to and beat, rinse and repeat. By this point, the series could use more destructible mayhem, especially when the games have always pushed players to cause mayhem. Imagine being able to blast into buildings with an RPG, crash into the football stadium with a tank and drive around the field, so much more than Saints Row currently has. I want more activities with more explorable buildings. Take a cue from Grand Theft Auto and let me go bowling, but do it in a Saints Row style. The issue with Saints Row is that there has been little innovation from what came before. If this game came out sometime after Saints Row 4, maybe it would have been forgivable, but as it stands, Saints Row needs to evolve. The game's identity is lost, and whether that is because of a different type of social climate, or maybe Saints Row has already reached its prime, I don't know. There is fun to have within Saints Row, but it certainly won't be remembered and definitely doesn't make the big impact the developers wanted. From its reveal in 2020, Stray was hands down going to be a great game, and it certainly did not disappoint in 2022. It's emotional, heartbreaking, and completely stunning. If you are a cat owner or an animal lover, you will love this game. As an owner of one too many cats, I can confirm that the cat in this game is very much like the cats in real life. The number of cat-like annoyances you can do is pretty humorous. It's really the small details that make this cat come alive. Scratching walls and furniture, knocking items over, and walking on keyboards. The game even has a designated meow button. If a cat can do it, chances are this game has it. I love how simplistic the story is, yet it becomes much more complicated as it goes on. The cat becomes separated from its family and stumbles upon an underground city full of robots. Humans are gone and robots have been locked in various areas to avoid a mutated bacteria. When the cat arrives, who is simply trying to find a way back to the surface, the robots rediscover their hope for freedom from the city lies within this cat. The whole idea that this one cat who stumbles upon all of this is practically their savior is simply incredible. The game is mostly about exploration with some puzzle solving and side quests. There is very minimal combat, if that combat is running away or utilizing gadgets to protect yourself. But the environment speaks for itself. It'll split between larger areas to explore and smaller linear areas with puzzles and combat. Despite the main game taking place underground, the game is not lacking in color, and I love seeing all the color that this game brings to life. It's simple. Stray is a must-play game with an impactful emotional journey. The Callisto Protocol isn't a game I wanted to have on my worst list, but the longer I played it, the more frustrating it became. The game was heavily advertised that it was from the creator of Dead Space. It even has similar game mechanics, but Dead Space, this game is not. It should have been on the same level as Dead Space, or better yet, a much more improved game than what we've seen. What elements does Dead Space have that this game could improve? The Callisto Protocol does not answer the question. The game's setting of a prison on the moon in space is the perfect backdrop, and it isn't too long till our protagonist Jacob is dropped into the start of the outbreak and, like any survival game, must escape. Of course, escape isn't easy and there's a larger conspiracy at play. It's an intriguing premise that simmers down halfway through the game, and it starts to feel like a story we witnessed hundreds of times. While I can forgive the story, the combat is very unforgiving. I can appreciate the developer's approach in trying a different combat system. Guns are unlockable throughout the game, but there's a big push for melee combat, but you can't truly go in and bash your way. You'll have to watch which way the creature is going to swing so you can dodge, but some swings can look deceiving. Groups of creatures are difficult to strategize through with the system, and ultimately you'll be using guns more than anything. But swapping to your desired gun is a longer process than it should be, especially when faced up against a boss. Healing isn't as simple either. Jacob can find small bits of health, but if he really wants to fill his health bar, he has to crouch and slowly inject himself. Again, doing this in combat is near impossible. The biggest flaw is making out like actor Sam Witwer, who many will know as Deacon in Days Gone or Starkiller in Star Wars The Force Unleashed, will have a greater role in the story, but he's ultimately pushed to the back and severely underused. It's such a waste for a talented actor and a primary antagonistic force. Frustrating combat aside, it's evident that the game works too hard at launching itself as a long-running series. It isn't uncommon to leave some questions unanswered for a sequel, but the Callisto Protocol really likes to do this, especially the cliffhanger, which doesn't even get me excited for a sequel. It's like the game just suddenly ends. And I'm betting that the story DLC coming in summer 2023 will pick up on this cliffhanger, which is even worse. Game updates have since improved many of these flaws, but for a launch player like myself who beat the game, these frustrations ruined the experience for me. The developers are listening to feedback and continue to make improvements, so the game may be worth playing now, but I would have to say to skip over the Callisto Protocol and play the Dead Space remake instead. Ghostwire Tokyo is one of the most overlooked games of the year, and it seems everyone has already forgotten about it. The game is completely stunning. It's not perfect, nor is it truly innovative, but that's okay. It uses what it knows and it makes something unique out of it. When Tokyo is engulfed in a mysterious fog and turns the population into spirits, and evil entities are summoned, an everyday regular man is possessed by a spirit, and the two must work together. And because the game is set in Japan, the game is only in Japanese with English subtitles. I really appreciate this game for sticking to this and deciding to not have an English dub. It adds to the game's atmosphere, and after a while, I love hearing the banter between the two. Now, the story itself is okay. It has a fine build-up, but the game's main antagonist and the ending are lacking. The real star of the game is Tokyo itself. Exploring a recreated Tokyo is breathtaking. Despite a lack of humans, it feels lived in and the culture is ever so present. The various districts are fun to explore and have their own identity, and as you unlock various powers and abilities, not only will you be taking the fight to the ground, but also on rooftops. With a large area of Tokyo to explore, it never feels tedious or boring to travel, despite fast travel being there. There's even a horror-like element to certain sections, and with mythical Japanese figures present, it only adds to the feeling. With the humans gone, dogs and cats have taken over, and if that isn't enough, these ethereal, spiritual cats have taken over convenience stores and shop stands where you can sell and purchase items. The game has a ton of side stories and quests along with multiple collectibles to find. If this were any other game, I would be at that point where it feels like a never-ending grind, but for some reason, I didn't feel this after my initial playthrough. Perhaps it's because of my love of Japan, or the fact that the open world doesn't feel vast and empty like other games. Ghostwire Tokyo does have its flaws. It could be looked at as a first-person shooter collectathon, but it does it in a way full of Japanese culture and feels respectful to it. If you own a PlayStation 5 or a PC, Ghostwire Tokyo is a title you need to have on it. The game will likely have an Xbox Series X and S version in 2023, so hopefully more people can play this severely underrated game. And that's my list. 5 disappointing games and 5 games I really enjoyed in 2022. But your list may be different, so let me know in the comments below. Please be sure to like and subscribe for future content. Happy holidays, and here's to a new year of exciting games. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.